Hello, Stratters. Nick here, known as the Exalted One on Magic the Gathering Online, back this week with some more modern action. And we're playing a bit of a brew of mine, a deck that a friend and I have been working on every once in a while in modern, just, dusting it off, seeing if we can make it work, seeing if it's competitive, and then often kind of coming to conclusion that it's not, or that it's for a very specific metagame and putting it on the shelf. A deck that we call Swan Fire. So it's built around something of a pet card of mine, Swans of Bryn Argoll, which is a bit of a weirdo, has a really interesting, unique effect, uh, which I'll read to you and then kind of explain. If a source would deal damage to Swans of Bryn Argoll, prevent that damage, the source's controller draws cards equal to the damage prevented this way. So, kind of what you would do with this typically is point your own burn spells at the Swans of Bryn Argoll. So if you have a Swans and you lightning bolt it, your lightning bolt essentially becomes Ancestral Recall. This can be a little bit dangerous if the opponent might have their own lightning bolts or their own burn spells. But at this point in Modern, lightning bolt's sort of at an all-time low. It doesn't kill, any of the creatures in the Grixis Death Shadow or any of the really important cards in Eldrazi Tron. So it's been seeing a lot less play than it has been, so I'm a little bit less worried about opponents having burn spells to point at their own, or at my Swans of Bryn Argoll, to make them draw cards. Swans is a little bit of an awkward card to get involved in combat as well, since any damage dealt by your opponent's creatures to the Swans makes your opponent draw cards, so you don't want to be attacking into opposing creatures. And you typically don't want to be doing a lot of blocking with your Swans of Bryn Argoll either. The other thing that Swans plays really well with is red-based sweepers. So cards that we've tried in the past to make work with Swans of Bryn Argoll. Wildfire, which is where the name Swanfire comes from. Each player sacrifices 4 lands. Swanfire deals 4 damage to each creature. This was a pretty difficult card to make work, both because it's expensive, 6 mana is a lot in Modern. Typically we're going to be playing this in a more control-ish deck, which makes the sacrificing lands very difficult to navigate. You could play things like Signets or Mindstone, Crucible of Worlds to try to break that symmetry, but that was a difficult thing. As well as 4 damage is really not the sweet spot in Modern these days. 5 is kind of where you want to be. Dealing 4 damage doesn't deal with things like Tarmogoyf, Tasigur, Gurmag Angler, so it's hard to make that card work. In certain metagames, you can make Swans of Bryn Argoll work with Anger of the Gods, so a 3 damage red sweeper that exiles creatures. Again, the damage is prevented to Swans, so it would exile all the things with toughness 3 or less. But then my Swans would live and I'd draw 3 cards. But again, the 3 is not always good enough for Modern, and you have to be playing against certain decks to make it work. So this is more of a sideboard card. The card that we are playing, and sort of the reason that I wanted to try playing this deck again, is Hour of Devastation, the namesake card from the new set. So I'll read it to you since it's a new one. All creatures lose indestructible until end of turn. Hour of Devastation deals 5 damage to each creature and each non-Bolas planeswalker. So Swans doesn't have indestructible, it has damage prevention, so if you cast an Hour of Devastation with Swans on board, you'll be drawing 5 cards. The indestructible clause doesn't come up as much in Modern as it probably will in Standard, but people do still play cards like Selfless Spirit to insulate their creature decks against sweepers, so it can be relevant. The real kicker here is the 5 damage, which is, again, kind of on that sweet spot, being able to kill Tarmogoyfs, Tasigurs, things like that. And the text about dealing 5 damage to each non-Bolas Planeswalker. Planeswalkers are a real headache to deal with in Modern. You can have negates and countersqualls to counter them on the stack, but if they resolve, your options are a little bit clunky and limited. So you have cards like Detention Sphere, Maelstrom Pulse, Dreadbore that you can play, Abrupt Decay if it's the right converted mana cost, Planeswalker. but these are kind of, again, sorcery speed, you know, a little bit more expensive or vulnerable in the case of Detention Sphere. So not always cards that you want to play, but this particular card is, you know, just really nice, dealing 5 damage to planeswalkers, probably enough to get most of them off the table, and it also deals with most of the creatures in play. You know, imagine a scenario against Abzan, for example, where they have a Tarmogoyf, some Lingering Souls, a Liliana of the Veil. There aren't a lot of cards you can draw that can get you out of that sort of scenario. Hour of Devastation is a card that you can draw to get you out of that scenario. So it's really powerful in that regard. The rest of the deck is essentially a Grixis control deck, card draw in Serum Visions, counter spells in Countersquall and Spell Snare. I think it's important to play some number of those since this deck is too heavy on the 4s and 5s to realistically play Cryptic Command, so you want to have a lot of the cheaper counter magic. Ton of removal, Fatal Push, Lightning Bolt, Terminate, some grindy elements with Snapcaster Mage and Kolagha's Command. Also, again, Lightning Bolt becomes a draw spell when you have a Swans of Bryn Argoll in play, similar with Kolagha's Command. You know, just rebuying a Snapcaster Mage, dealing 2 to your Swans of Bryn Argoll, that's really powerful. And then a couple Vendilion Cliques to kind of fill things out. Just extra creatures to rebuy with your Kolagha's Command to make them a little bit better. You can check the opponent's hand for removal before you're playing your Swans, which is really nice. And also, you know, there's a lot of cards we don't want redundancy of. We want our first Swans, maybe not the second Swans. You know, first Hour of Devastation is probably going to be good for us. The second one maybe a little bit less good, so Vendilion Clique can be good in that sense to either check your opponent's hand or cycle away some of these niche cards. Turning to the mana base here, this is very similar to the mana base that I played with my Teamer deck. Again, that deck had, you know, Cryptic Command, Huntmaster, some really powerful 4-drops that we wanted to make sure we could cast on time. Same sort of thing here. We have Swans and Hour of Devastation, really powerful 4 and 5 drops that we want to be casting on time. So just making sure all of our lands can come into play untapped almost all the time. So we aren't playing any cards like Creeping Tar Pit or Spirebluff Canal, just all fetch lands, shock lands, some basics, some of these check lands, which almost always come into play untapped by turns 4 and 5. And then our utility land of choice is Desolate Lighthouse, one of my favorite utility lands to play. Just really powerful to be able to turn excess lands into other cards or get rid of some dead removal or counter magic. Maybe discard a creature if you don't have one in your graveyard to make a Kolagha's Command in your hand a little bit more powerful. So that's the main deck, turning our attention to the sideboard. A lot of the answers you'll see in a lot of the decks that I play. Ceremonious Rejection, just good against Eldrazi, but can also have utility against Affinity, Dispel, nice cheap counter magic, and the more control-ish mirrors. Graveyard Hate with Leyline of the Void and Nihil Spellbomb. Collective Brutality, just a nice versatile card, can be a source of life gain against burn, extra discard against control decks, a lot of different functions that you can use Collective Brutality for. A couple extra sweepers. Anger of the Gods I like in this deck, again, just a good combo of Swans, but some of the creature decks, once they realize that the sweeper you're playing is Hour of Devastation, just try to flood the board and kind of keep, you know, win before Hour of Devastation can come online. Being able to catch them with Anger of the Gods is a really nice play. Also, utility against Dredge, and, you know, nice against decks that play Voice of Resurgence and Kitchen Finks. I think it's always good to have one Engineered Explosives in your Grixis deck, just to try to mitigate the effects of any, you know, 2 or 3 mana enchantments that you might encounter, but it's also a fine card against token strategies, or decks that have a lot of 1-drops like Elves or Death Shadow. Not that Death Shadow has a lot of 1-drops, but killing Death Shadow is very important. And, Engineered Explosives is a card that you can put on the board whenever for 1 mana and activate for 2 as an answer to the Death Shadows. Finally, since we're such a removal-heavy deck, In some matchups, we aren't going to want a lot of removal. Creature-less combo decks like Ad Nauseam or control decks that don't play a lot of win conditions. You want to cut some of that, and you want to have some more threats after board. So we have a Keranos, a Teferi, and a Tasigur. I could see myself maybe even changing this between matches as we go, but Tasigur is just a nice cheap threat because of the delve that you can get down. Keranos, really resilient. Teferi, maybe a card that I might swap out for something else, but being able to land this and mitigate the opponent's counter magic is really nice. Again, I could maybe see myself swapping some of these out and trying some different things, maybe going up to 2 Tasigurs or something like that. But you want to have some added threat density since we have so much removal in the main deck. So this is the deck Swan Fire. I'll be playing it through this week for a few different matches. Hopefully we always draw our swans, draw some burn spells, or some red-based removal to combo with the swans, draw lots of cards, do lots of sweet things. Hopefully that's what our matches are like. Thanks for watching, Stratters, and I will see you at the matches.
Hello, Stratters. Nick here, playing a match of Modern with Swan Fire. And normally I don't do these kind of recorded playbacks that Moto gives you, but normally when I do a couple practice rounds before I play with the deck, just to get a feel for things before I start recording with it. Normally, that's kind of working the bugs out. Things don't go quite right. But in this particular case, the deck just fired on all cylinders, so I thought I would go back and show you the playback here. So from this opening, I can tell I'm against the white Death and Taxes deck. Could still be like a green-white Death and Taxes deck, but more than likely mono-white with the Eiganjo Castle. And then once I see a tech edge, that kind of also indicates towards mono-white because they play the full Ghost Quarters, and then tech edges would be a little bit extra. So kind of getting caught up on things, just kind of casting some Serum Visions in the first couple turns, trying to not take too much damage from my mana base. My opponent cycles the Scattered Groves, which probably just indicates like being a budget against playing Horizon Canopy. They don't have too fast of a start, although they did have an Aether Vial, and they had this Thraben Inspector, so they have a little bit going on. As far as, what we have it going on, though, I feel, alright as long as our mana base doesn't get torched. If they go Leonin Arbiter, Ghost Quarter, we might be in some trouble, but otherwise we have, plenty of removal. Countersquall isn't great in this matchup, but we do have a click, so if worst comes to worst, we can click ourselves to get rid of this Countersquall, and then sometimes throwing in click as a blocker can also be fine, and if they happen to use a Path to Exile on the click, and they don't have an Arbiter in play, that'll at least help us a little bit with our mana situation, kind of counteract maybe what they're going to be doing with tech edges and Ghost Quarters. So opponent plays a Blade Splicer. Here I kind of had a somewhat interesting decision as far as how to use the Kolagha's command. I end up taking the Golem and the Blade Splicer, but there's some consideration to taking out like the Thraben Inspector or the Blade Splicer. Probably the Blade Splicer because they could have a Flicker Wisp and the Aether Vial, which leaves a little bit more pressure in play. But by destroying the Aether Vial, this would have made it very difficult for them to start using Tectonic Edges on me because it sets their own mana back so far. So that's one point where, looking at now, I think maybe I should have went after the Aether Vial because I have plenty of removal here for the Golem, or can ambush it with Vendilion Clique potentially. But if I blow up this Aether Vial, then, like I said, just really disincentivizing using the tech edges. So if I played this game over again, I think that probably would have been one line that I would have changed. And again, kind of the reason to take out the Blade Splicer instead of the Thraben Inspector is that another 3/3, if they Flicker Wisp this, would be more annoying than another clue. So here, drawing Hour of Devastation is obviously really nice, as long as they don't, again, torch my mana base with these Tectonic Edges. If I'm able to get to 5 mana and destroy their board, that'll be great. At this point, maybe if they're a little bit choked on white mana, they might try to cycle these clues instead of using the Tectonic Edges. So there's a little bit of risk involved by playing out this 4th land and allowing the opponent to have the option, if they draw a land, to double Tectonic Edge me. If you don't know, the trick is you can activate the ability if they control 4 or more lands. So you activate one, so say blow up my Sulfur Falls, hold priority, blow up my Steam Vents. So you see 4 lands as you activate the 2 Tectonic Edges, then as they resolve, so you can go from 4 lands down to 2 lands with this Tectonic Edge trick. So they didn't do this thing with the Tectonic Edges. So at this point, I play out of Vendilion Clique, and I don't actually want to click my opponent, because really I don't necessarily care what they have. This might get them to use the Vial if I click them. And it could also force out a Path to Exile, both, which would be fine results. But I really wanted to hit a 5th land so I could potentially get this Hour of Devastation off, and so that I could recover when they do eventually fire off these Tectonic Edges. Plus this Countersquall is kind of dead. So I end up clicking myself. My opponent activates the Vial, so maybe they didn't realize that I wasn't targeting them. So they put this Mirran Crusader into play, which does look good in this matchup if they think that I'm playing a boltless deck. However, since I'm playing Swans of Bryn Argoll, I'm playing all the lightning bolts, and Mirran Crusader is a little bit less good, plus I have this damage-based red sleeper. So at this point, I'm pretty worried. I do finally take out that Aether Vial with this one Kolaghan's Command, and I use the other mode to discard. They get rid of a Leyline Arbiter, which will make any top deck Ghost Quarters a little bit worse. Use a Lightning Bolt to take care of this Mirran Crusader, just preserve my life total as best as possible. That, and I feel like this Hour of Devastation probably is not going to happen. So I think my opponent actually intended to do the double Tectonic Edge trick here, but they might have not held priority. You have to hold the control button, but you have to be holding it by the time that you started the first activation for it to happen. It's one of the things about Magic Online that I kind of don't like, is how some of this priority holding things are. Another thing I really dislike about Magic Online, and this is just a service announcement for those of you. So this Leyline Arbiter's ability, I mean, a lot of times when you're just playing paper Magic, you'll crack your fetch and then you'll just tap 2 lands and tell the opponent I'm paying for the ability. When you do it on Magic Online, make sure that you pay for it before you do any searching. Pay then crack your fetch. Don't crack your fetch then pay. That's not something that you can do. But in order to do that, you have to actually click on Leyline Arbiter, and it says ignore this ability and pay your 2. Just be aware of that. I've probably gotten it a lot, just enough to be frustrated by it. So not doing too bad here. We're able to get all our removal in, play Swans. Now if we're ever able to get double red, it'd be nice because we can just fire off Hour of Devastation. So here an attack is a little bit awkward because the opponent could have potentially had a Flicker Wisp or like a Restoration Angel, but it was important. I wouldn't make this attack if my opponent had Ghost Quartered my Sulfur Falls. I need to be able to fire off a Terminate when I make that attack. Otherwise my opponent could ambush with Restoration Angel or Flicker Wisp. Flicker Wisp doesn't trade, actually neither does the Angel, but they would draw a ton of cards. It would be 3 cards, even though I would kill whatever they blocked with. But I think that's bad enough, if we let the opponent draw 3 cards, that's an attack that you need to be careful with. So the opponent does actually have a Flicker Wisp. They just fired off the end step, so I can kind of preventing an attack with the Swans. That's one of the neat tricks that you can do with Vials. And they do it again here. So at this point, I'm just trying to get together enough red mana that we have the possibility of casting this Hour of Devastation. My opponent Ghost Quarters me, but I was already able to pay because I searched with the fetch land. And we take out the Arbiter. I think that's the more annoying creature here. And then on upkeep, I fire off this Kolaghan's command. And the modes I did were to just kill the Flicker Wisp, which was basically had to happen, and to rebuy my Vendilion Clique. It's tempting to make them discard, but the thing is, if I return a Clique, I can stop them on draw step, and then as long as the card that they draw is in a Path to Exile or a 3-drop, I can click it out of their hand. Here I'm going to see that they have 2 lands in hand, so we're in a pretty good shape. And Countersquall is actually a really nice draw now that we have this Vendilion Clique that we're beating down with, so we can prevent any Path to Exiles on it. We have plenty of answers for Athalia that we could draw. We didn't draw one this turn. I also kept the land in hand here because we have Desolate Lighthouse in the deck. Opponent plays Leyline Arbiter, so we know that the last card in hand is a Plains. So things not looking great for us. We do draw what will be a red source for our Hour of Devastation. And here we're basically forced into chump blocking with the Vendilion Clique. They just attack with the first striker, which makes a lot of sense. We chump with the Clique because we know we're going to cast the Hour of Devastation anyways. Search out our red source and fire off the Hour. So again, we have a decent number of answers in our hands. If I were the opponent, I probably would have been a little bit more aggressive with this Ghost Quarter. Once you see a basic of each color, and a lot of times these decks don't play a ton more. And here we have basically Ancestral Recall because of this Swans. And we also have Countersquall to defend it, Spell Snare now to defend it, so things are going really well for us. Opponent tries to path, we Countersquall. So the opponent wasn't actually dead here, but maybe they just really didn't have a ton of outs at that point. I don't know how many paths they went through. I guess this is only the second one, but they would go to 8 from the Countersquall, 4 down, 8 from this Countersquall, down to 4 from the Swans hitting, and then they basically have to draw a Flyer, or which we have covered with a Lightning Bolt, or another path, and really no creatures are going to do it because we have another Hour of Devastation. Even if they find a path, like we can bolt our Swans in response to the Path to Exile and draw more cards. So it was looking pretty good, even though I think this concession may have been a turn or two too early, but the opponent's on really low percentages to win the game at this point. So that was game 1. Close that out. Sideboarding, I think I just sided out 2 Countersqualls. I brought in an Anger of the Gods, and what else did I bring in? A Tasigur, I think, was the other card, just because Countersquall doesn't have a ton of targets. Okay, so game 2. That hand just was no good. Even though we had Anger, we had such awkward mana. Island and 2 islands and a lighthouse just wasn't going to cut it. This hand we have plenty of removal. The sweeper that we boarded in. So the opponent probably is going to be a little bit more cognizant this game of Hour of Devastation as our sweeper, which is 5 mana, which is a lot. The opponent has Thalia and Mana Denial, so as long as they could keep us off double red or try to keep Thalia in play, they probably feel like they can play around that card. Having Anger of the Gods as well now makes it a little bit harder to do that, so the opponent's probably going to lay out all their creatures and kind of try to play around the Hour of Devastation, and then since we have this Anger, we should be able to get them with that. And opponent didn't have Vial, which is always a great feeling. This deck really feels very different depending on whether the opponent has Vial or not. So opponent's got a lot of pressure. I decided to take out the Golem here, or no, I decided to take out the Thalia just because that taxing effect is really annoying. And then I took out the Golem with Kolaghan's command and just attack their hand. It wasn't really 2 damage isn't particularly good when we have an Anger of the Gods in hand. And now is a really good turn to fire off the Anger of the Gods, so I do cast Serum Visions, and I think I bottomed both of those cards. Really just looking for basically Swans to pair with these Lightning Bolts at this point, which we find. So a very important fetch first here so that we're able to leave up, if the opponent goes end of turn path, we can Lightning Bolt our Swans in response to that. The opponent doesn't attack with Blade Splicer, so the Golem attack is pretty free. It's first strike. My Swans, if I block here, that would make them draw 3 cards. Blade Splicer, I feel like this attack is also potentially fine because if I block it, it prevents 1 damage to the Swans and the opponent draws 1 card. And if I were the opponent, I probably would trade this for 1 card from my deck, essentially. Unless the opponent has a Flicker Wisp in hand or something like that. But given that they pass the turn, probably don't have that. Swans is kind of a confusing card, so I think sometimes people don't quite understand what happens when you engage in combat with the Swans. So I start attacking. My opponent cracks a clue, cycles Scattered Grove, so this is when I start going off. So we fired off 2 Lightning Bolts targeting the Swans, drew 6 cards, and we got a lot to work with here. What I decide to do is just Fatal Push the Golem. The opponent plays quite a bit to the board. Another attack with Swans, and we fire off Hour of Devastation. Just draw 5 cards. A lot going on here, so just basically refueled our hand, and I just ditch a couple of lands and then Serum Visions. The opponent has a Restoration Angel, which puts me to 2, gives them at least the opportunity to draw another Angel, or Mirrored Crusader is a pretty difficult card to deal with, so this is another card that could potentially steal the game. However, I have Snapcaster Lightning Bolt for the Mirrored Crusader, and then I have a Terminate for the Restoration Angel. I could just Hour of Devastation here, but mostly I didn't want to, put myself in any potential risk of decking, I guess. I don't know. This is the deck firing on all cylinders here. Just bolting your Swans, Hour of Devastations, where your Swan, is the only thing on the board, and you draw 5 cards, and this is what I signed up for. But this point, I think I actually got a couple more moves in that the recording isn't showing here, but I bolt this, Terminate the Angel, and my opponent untaps and concedes. But this is what the deck does, and this is what I hope to do in the actual live recorded matchups for you. So I'll be back with some of those, but I just wanted to show, in case that doesn't happen, that this deck can do some really crazy, broken, sweet things. So stay tuned, Stratters. I hope you enjoyed that, and I hope there's a lot of enjoyment to come.